Hello, it's Jennifer here. I thought I'd do part two of my Gen X Witch series. Just to kind of explain to you, I was having some computer issues last week, and my laptop had to be, it died and had to be completely wiped and reinstalled. And when I was recording the first video, I hadn't realized that I didn't change my sleep mode settings. So halfway through recording the video, my screen went to sleep and it turned off the webcam, and then I had to go and like re-record half of it, and in the process I had to re-record what I had said, and I think I had forgotten a few things because I was speaking extemporaneously and whatnot. So obviously they're not scripted, so I forgot a few things and didn't clarify things as well as I would have liked to have. So I thought I'd do a part two because there were a few, and then also thought of additional things that I wanted to mention. The first thing I wanted to mention, because it came to my attention today, like talking about, because I addressed a couple times throughout the first video how Gen X is being referred to as the Karen generation. And yes, we do have a Karen problem. And what I hadn't realized, because, I was paying attention to larger issues in the world, like, the coronavirus pandemic, staying alive and things like that, is that the Karens of the world have decided that the K word is a racial slur. Seriously? I don't know how many times a day I end up being like, seriously? No, it's not a racial slur. You're just a bitch. Sorry. And I want to separate some of what I said in the last one, because there's a difference between being a woman or woman identifying person with a strong voice who speaks their mind and is confident and secure in who they are, and then just being a bitch who wants to speak to the manager because you're just full of white privilege and all that bullshit, and weaponizing their whiteness. And that is a freaking problem. And I just wanted to kind of clarify that because I didn't in the previous video. And no, Gen Xers aren't all Karens. I will say that. It's a shame. Because, I think people need to have strong voices, but at the same time, it's how you use them. And maybe I take it for granted a little bit because I live in a city that is very diverse, and the neighborhood I live in is very diverse. That's not always my experience of living in the suburbs or rural areas, because I don't even really get out of the city that much, especially right now, that we're on lockdown and stuff like that. I think the furthest I've gone is like South Philly. But I know this doesn't exactly have to do with witchcraft at the moment, but I'm getting there because, I wanted to bring in a few more perspectives, from the Generation Xer. And I have a couple notes in front of me so I don't forget what I want to talk about this time. So, yeah. The whole Karen thing, I'm sorry, but no, it's not a racial slur. And if you think it's a racial slur, get over yourself. Seriously. And think about what you do and your actions and stuff like that. Because, I know for me, while I have a strong personality and whatnot, I go out of my way to not speak to the manager. I think I've had to once, and that was with Amazon handmade customer service after a several month long issue I was having with my business account. But it was Amazon, so I don't feel entirely guilty about that. I think I even was like, oh, I had to Karen today, But if you get my coffee order wrong, I'm not going to scream in your face and ask to speak to the manager. Because as I mentioned in my previous video, one of the great things about being over 40 is having zero fucks to give. So if you fuck up my coffee order, chances are I'm not even going to, it's not even going to be a blip on my radar. And I hate iced coffee. One time my order got messed up and I got iced coffee, and I was just like, all right, well, whatever. Because, I don't want to make a fuss. I don't want to be that person. I'm more likely to, if I buy something and it's the wrong size, I'm just like, well, that was my fuck up. I'm not going to go, out, and then it's just wasting my time trying to return it and stuff like that. But, if there's a serious problem, I'll bring it up. But it's not every little thing. And I think that's the problem that is with the Karens of the world, is that it's the entitlement of every little thing and wanting the world handed to them, and demanding the respect to just speak to the manager, someone important in charge and whatnot. And I worked in retail at some point in time, and that behavior's been around for a long time. And sometimes you need to speak to the manager because there's like, I can't refund you, I don't have the access codes to refund you or whatever. And it's, I've seen both sides of it, where I've worked retail and have, had to deal with the customers like that. And hopefully I haven't been the customer like that. I'm sure I have on occasion, but usually it's I've had a question about something, and the person I was speaking to was very defensive in a way that I was like, I just had a question. Why are you, I'm not even asking for a refund here. I'm just like, can you clarify this for me? But I digress. So, some of the other things I wanted to touch around from the Gen X perspective, and this is something I talk a lot about in the various local witchcraft circles, and online sometimes, and even in like the herbalist communities. One of the things that I find sometimes I'm a little bit stuck in the gray area on, and I seek to learn, is especially in the modern witchcraft sort of practice, is the whole cultural appropriation thing. And I think I will probably do some videos on that later. It's something I really want to research better, because as a white person speaking on cultural appropriation, who has seen other people do so, my biggest problem with that is that I've seen countless people speak on, and they're trying to do the right thing and make you aware of something, but they're speaking on behalf of a culture, a group, a race, as if it were a monolith, that every single person thinks and feels the exact same thing and way. And that is never true of anything. In my experiences, you're going to have a whole gamut of things, from no, don't ever do that, to whatever. So, that's something that has to be taken into consideration with that. And for some of the older Gen Xers, is that there's a lot of things that we grew up with that were, alternative or normal, but, like having dreadlocks or whatever. I would have never thought of that as being cultural appropriative, because, I grew up with that. That was the alternative scene. That was the grunge kids. That was, the cyber goths and things like that and whatnot. So that to me was like, I had a different experience of that. And maybe there was a little bit of gray area in not understanding necessarily how something like that was appropriative. And occasionally, it's confusing. I don't always know. I'm like, is it not? I always find the best thing when you're told something is, look into it and understand it, because at least, like, one of the things I've talked about is, the popularity of smudging with white sage. Now, that is a sacred ceremony to the indigenous cultures and people here. Now, there are a lot of feelings about it being culturally appropriative, and the best you can do is at least understand why. And as I said in my previous video, do the work. No one's saying you can't smudge your house. Just understand, like, the sacred nature of that ceremony, and that in the United States, it was illegal for the indigenous people to practice their religion until 1978. That was in my lifetime. So it's just being aware of things sometimes. It's like, no one's saying no, you can't burn some sage. Just understand. Just think about it. about it in a larger frame, not just, oh, I bought some sage because someone told me, smudging is cool or whatnot. So that's a little bit tangential, but that's just kind of one of the things I wanted to bring in is the perspective, because I think the younger generations have a much better grasp on some of these issues maybe than the Gen Xers do, and I appreciate that. And then there's also times where there's a little bit of cluelessness, like not to call out a particular book that I read in book club on Witchcraft Activism. I'm not going to name it. But, talking about, activism and stuff like that over the, I'm like, you're talking, granted, I feel like the book was written for someone 20 plus years younger than me. But at the same time, I'm like, how can you talk about activism and not mention Black Lives Matter? And I make only a vague, like almost like humorous reference, like don't wear a Save the Whales t-shirt to a Black Lives Matter march or something like that. I'm like, really? Looking at the examples this particular author gave in the book, it was just very, I could see it being inspiring if I was in high school, but looking at it from the Gen Xer perspective, I found the whole book utterly offensive. And I was like, this is some freaking white nonsense right here. I'm like, do you know a Black person? And it was just, so that's sometimes where as a generation, our collective sort of jaded cynicism and our inability to shut the fuck up at times, feeds into how we feel about things and how we react to them, because I utterly hated this book. And I don't usually hate books with such animosity, but it was just very clear that the person who wrote the book didn't do the work. There wasn't even a bibliography. She's quoting things directly. I'm like, would you maybe want to reference that somehow? But I mean, it seemed more like this book could have been a really good like blog post series or a vlog, even not like a print published book. But I digress. But that's just something where there's a little bit of differences in how we see things, and especially now with the access of knowledge and the ease of doing the work, there is no excuse to not have a bibliography and to not do the work and to have a very myopic view when you're talking about global activism and things like that. And yes, okay, this in the book they talked about Standing Rock and the Zapatistas and a couple other things, but you left out Black Lives Matter. Come on. That part really made me angry. But, a lot of this does have an impact on modern witchcraft, because a lot of practices do come from, indigenous populations and their sacred practices and shamanism and the African diaspora religions, voodoo, Santeria, Palomayombe, also through New Orleans, hoodoo as well. And it's just understanding some of that information and just being aware that, okay, again, no one's saying you can't, make a honey jar or, hot foot powder someone, but just understand that those practices are a legacy of the history of colonialism, oppression, and slavery. So that's something you need to be aware of when you are like looking up spells online and how to do this and the other thing. And just, again, understanding, doing the work, and educating yourself on where these practices come from. And that, it's not just clear cut, plain and simple. And some things, like for me in my personal practice, I'm very interested in hoodoo and voodoo. And there's some things for me that, like, okay, there's a form of divination called throwing the bones, which involves various curios and animal bones and things like that. That, to me, as a white woman, I don't feel comfortable doing. I don't feel like that is part of my cultural heritage to do. And however, in my cultural heritage in the Slavic and Russian witchcraft, there is a practice of reading the bones, which is different. Usually they would take something like a ham hock, boil it down, and then they would do divination type readings from the striations and markings on the bones afterwards. Now that would be something I would be more comfortable with. I don't really feel like doing that because I don't think I've ever had a ham hock in my house. I don't do a lot of cooking because I live alone. But another thing on that note that's come up, and this is something I'm guilty of, is there's a movement to decolonize your bookshelf. So to look at authors and things, and also for YouTube, I don't just watch, I watch a very wide array of YouTube channels and I read a very wide array of books, but it's decolonizing your bookshelf. And I'm guilty of, sometimes I'll be like, okay, I'm picking up a book on whatever, and I don't think about, unless there's a glossy photo on the book jacket or something, I don't always think about who is writing this book. And there's times I've made assumptions and have been wrong. And a perspective of just, yes, there has been and still is a glut of white authors and YouTubers, and things like that. But find other voices and listen to them. And read their books, read their blogs, read their websites, follow their social media accounts and whatnot. A few additional things I wanted to bring up, sort of from the Gen X perspective. Because again, as I mentioned in the previous video, a lot has changed, and some of that is becoming more culturally aware of things. And a lot has changed in my generation and in my time on this planet, and it's just becoming more aware of things and doing the work to understand them. And if I don't understand something, I Google it. I find a reference in a book. It's not that hard. It's much easier now than it was, 25 years ago. And I get frustrated sometimes. And today I'm frustrated a little bit with the Karens of the world, but, it's... So, to summarize, Gen Xers are awesome most of the time. Occasionally, we have a Karen problem. I know I personally had to deal with the Karen problem as an aromatherapist. This goes off on another tangent because I have what I call the no Karen, please don't do that files. It's sort of like the no Karen, please don't soak your tampons in tea tree essential oil and stick them up your hoo-ha for infections. That's not a place you want chemical burns. Oh, and please vaccinate your children. Because, frankincense isn't the same as getting a vaccine. Elderberry syrup may help with the flu, but it's, and going on and on down the road. And I've had to leave a lot of groups because I've, again, as I mentioned, I like to share knowledge, and I'm very safety conscious. So don't put essential oils in your eyes. Yeah. No, I actually did have to write a blog post on the whole, please don't soak your tampons in tea tree oils. Yeah. Yeah. I've had to write things like that to the Karens of the world who think they know better and stuff like that. And, I'm not going to get started on the anti-vaxxer thing because that is something that's one of my hot button issues. As someone who has immunocompromised family members, one of which is my nephew and things like that. No. That is a non-negotiable thing for me. And so when people think of Karens, that's what they're thinking of. They're thinking of the woman who's screaming in line about seeing the manager, the one that's like, oh, have you tried essential oils for your, have you tried essential oils for, your child's measles? Well, no. And some of these things are downright dangerous. And I don't know. I think the suburbs are a very weird place. Again, do the work, learn a thing, be nice to people. I don't know. Seems like basically I'll just leave it at this, is that, be nice to people. Do the work. Try to understand things from other perspectives other than your own. Sometimes older people know better. Sometimes they don't. It's, and sometimes younger people know better, and sometimes they don't. We have very different experiences, and sometimes that just comes down to where you live and what you've been exposed to in your life. And I'm lucky to have spent half my life in Philadelphia, and it's an awesome city full of awesome people for the most part. We get a bad rap, but Philly's awesome. Anyways, I'm gonna wrap up and edit this video. But as always, Anyways, thank you for watching. Don't forget to click like or subscribe, and thank you to my Patreon supporters, and mwah!